I'm Ken Rockwell here on kenrockwell.tv, also known as kenrockwell.com to most of you folks. Let's take a look at Canon's newest 100 to 300 millimeter f2.8L ISUSM. Now, this is the case in which it comes, which is actually a pretty nice case. It's all padded nylon. It has a Cyclops single strap on the back. It's got two pouches on the side, which I don't quite know if they'd hold an extender. They probably would. And if you get this lens, you definitely want to get the 1.4 and or the 2 times extenders, because it makes the lens a totally different lens. It makes it into 140 to 420 f4 or 200 to 600 f5.6, both with excellent performance, excellent autofocus and super sharpness. So if you're getting this lens for 10 grand, by all means, invest the extra half a grand in a tele extender and you've got double as many lenses. The hood, it's a plastic thing with a metal screw here. I always use a 112 millimeter filter on the front rather than a cap, just to keep the lens protected. It's always ready to rock. This has got a nice tripod collar. It's very precise. It's got clicks at 90 degrees. But let's take a look at some of the pictures I can make with this little beast first. Here's a picture of the back of a car at 300 millimeters at f2.8, wide open, handheld at 160th of a second at auto ISO 100, with +1 stop of exposure compensation for the white car. Now, of course, even at this distance, at f2.8 at 300 millimeters is maybe 6 inches of depth of field, but we can zoom in. Of course, it's sharp. All the 300 millimeter 2.8s from Nikon and Canon have always been exquisitely sharp, and this new zoom is no different. It's sharp edge to edge at 2.8. That's why you buy it, because when you pay 10 grand for a lens, you're expecting the best, and this lens, of course, delivers. Here's a lifeguard tower and a seagull. Again, shot on the R6 Mark II. This is, again, at 300 millimeters at f2.8, handheld easily at 125th at ISO 100. Now, what's interesting is even this thing is probably 100 feet away. F2.8 at 300 millimeters makes the background so far out of focus that it almost looks like it's a miniature or a diorama. Here's a Porsche in sapphire blue metallic. This is at 241 millimeters, wide open at f2.8 at 1,000th of a second at auto ISO 100, -7/10 of a stop exposure for the dark car. As I'm zooming in here again, you can see, of course, it's sharp, and you probably can see that it's got essentially no depth of field. And that's a general idea of some of the pictures. Now, my apologies. I really wanted to get dogs jumping in the water at sunset behind them, but, you know, it didn't happen. It was all June gloom and May gray, so my apologies. The best thing to do with this lens is for shooting sports. What you all want to know is autofocus is almost instantaneous. It's faster than my own eyes. It doesn't focus very close. It only focuses up to 6 feet, but it can autofocus from 6 feet out to infinity in the blink of an eye, faster than my own eyes focus. It's not instantaneous, but it's pretty much as fast as you could imagine. And you're not going to be shooting anything that goes from 6 feet out to infinity in 1/10 of a second, or however long it takes to do that. So you should have no problems with autofocus, so you're going to get your action. It's just a question of whether or not you can get your settings correct and get your shots properly. This is a big zoom ring. I've got pretty big hands. And the lucky thing for me is I can use my fingers to zoom it. If you have little hands, you might have to do that with your wrist, which could become difficult. The focus ring has such fine ribs that you can't really find it by feel. So as you're shooting, if you want to grab manual focus, you're not going to find it as easily. There's a control ring up here, but I find when I'm holding this lens, I try to reach forward because it balances right about here when you've got a camera body on it. To try to reach up to get this control ring, I find it's easier just to use the controls on my camera, but to each their own. And of course, this frontmost ring here, these are 4 programmable focus lock buttons, meaning you can program to do other things than focus lock, but that's what they usually do. A nifty feature for a lot of these ultra tels is what's called preset focus. If you look at this one here, if you push it forward, it's a lens function button, like most lenses that have a function button on them. If you set it to preset, now when you focus the lens and you tap this button here, it presets that focus distance into the lens's computer. So if you put the switch here to recall, anytime you tap this button, it instantly resets to the preset focus distance. If you're an astronomer, you can set it to infinity during the daytime, so you can have this at night. Or for most people shooting sports or birds or whatever, set this to home plate or your bird feeder, and regardless of what goes on, if somebody moves to that position, you can tap this while you're pointing the camera, and it's already focused on whatever you preset. Of course, it's got stabilization and focus limiter and all the things you're usually used to. Bokeh is pretty good. When you're shooting at close distances, like headshot distance like these shots here, the backgrounds just melt away. What I wasn't as impressed at is the bokeh at long distances. Here's a shot. It's the same shot I showed before, but we're going to look at the bokeh now. The bokeh in the background's not that exciting if you're shooting at long distances, just to let you know. Distortion is negligible. It's not going to be visible at all for the most part, except at 100 millimeters where there's a little bit of barrel distortion. And again, all the exact measurements and everything are at my website, at my written review. If you want to see sample images and download them in their full glorious resolution and so forth, go to kenrockwell.com, follow my links, and you can get all the information in far more detail than I can possibly present on this video. Fall off is negligible. Fall off correction is automatically engaged on most of the Canon cameras, in which case it's completely invisible. And even if you turn it off, it's just a little bit there at 2.8, a little bit more at 2.8 at 300, but otherwise it's also invisible. Filters, for you folks who don't remember what a real lens was like, it's got a metal front filter thread, which means unlike the crappy plastic threads that people accept today, when you get this thing on, here's a trick. You rotate it counterclockwise until you hear a click, and that way the threads are lined up. There we go. Now that you're threaded properly, one turn, one flick of the wrist, and it just glides home. And you don't have to worry about it getting cross-threaded. Most of the lens is metal. This is metal, 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 that's metal, that's metal, that's metal, that's metal. It's all metal, except for some of these switches and this one particular ring, which are plastic. Everything's metal, like a lens should be made. Macro does not get that close. I said it only gets to 6 feet, so this is as close as you're going to get at 300 millimeters. It's not a macro lens. This is ideal for sports and action where you're shooting in any light condition, especially low light, and you can zoom. Unlike using a fixed 300 2.8 where you always have to grab your other body with your 70 to 200 on it when the action got closer. This, you can just zoom out and you are ready to go and you don't miss your shots. Also intriguing is it has very little spherochromatism. It's a long, fast lens, and there really are no color fringes on out of focus areas. That's a very good thing that I wasn't expecting to see on this lens. Stabilization works well. The full test results are at my website, but anywhere between 3, 4, 4.5, 4 2/3 stops of improvement at any of the various settings, it's a good performer there. Sunstars, it's what I expect for a 9-bladed curving diaphragm, meaning that it doesn't really have much in the way of sunstars. Except at the smallest apertures. Teleconverters works great with teleconverters. Sharpness is going to be superb, and autofocus is also going to be superb. And especially, too, I can use stacked teleconverters on an f5.6 telephoto lens. So you use teleconverters on this 2.8 where you can't even stack them, meaning you can only use one converter at once. It's going to be marvelous. The tripod collar has both 1/4-20 and 3/8 by 16 sockets. And that's most of it. It's a hard lens not to love, except for the fact that it is heavy and it is expensive, but it's not something you're going to regret because it handles well. If you hate it, used, they sell for almost as much as they sell for new, so you're not going to have to worry about that. By all means, if you want one, get it. It's just a serious lens. It's easy enough to carry around most of the day, but you're not going to want to carry around much else with it. That's want to. I mean, if you do this for a living, then you really don't have any choice and you're carrying, 3 bodies around your neck. But it's a great lens to love, although it is pricey. But again, the quality is remembered long after the price is forgotten. Thanks again for watching Ken Rockwell here on kenrockwell.com and kenrockwell.tv.